I didn't think I'd make it through that night. The wind was howling like a wounded animal, and the snow came down so thick, it felt like the whole world had disappeared. I was driving home after working a double shift at the diner, my hands stiff on the wheel, my breath fogging up the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. My old car rattled with every gust of wind, and I prayed it wouldn't give out on me. Not tonight, not in this storm. Then I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the swirling snow. But as I squinted through the frosted windshield, my stomach tightened. It was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stumbling through the storm with nothing but a thin jacket and a backpack. His steps were uneven, his head bowed against the wind, and it hit me like a punch. He was alone. I didn't hesitate. Slamming the brakes, I threw the car in a park and jumped out, the icy air stealing my breath. "Hey," I called, waving my arms as I ran toward him. He didn't stop. If anything, he seemed to be moving slower, like his legs were giving out under him. When I reached him, I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. His face was pale, lips blue, and his eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, locked onto mine. "Where's your family?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "What are you doing out here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he swayed on his feet and collapsed into my arms. I barely managed to drag him back to the car, my heart pounding as I wrestled with the door and bundled him inside. He was so cold, it felt like I was holding a block of ice. "Stay with me, okay?" I said, cranking the heat and wrapping my scarf around him. "You're going to be all right. Just stay with me." As I drove, my hands shaking on the wheel, a million questions raced through my mind. Who was he? Where had he come from? And why was he out in the middle of nowhere during one of the worst snowstorms of the year? I didn't know it yet, but that night was about to change everything, for both of us. The boy hadn't spoken a word by the time I reached my tiny house on the edge of town. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, juggling him and his backpack. He was so small, his body limp as I carried him inside and laid him on the worn-out couch. His pale face looked almost ghostly in the dim light of my living room. "All right, kid," I murmured, brushing snow from his tangled hair. "Let's get you warmed up." I rushed to grab blankets, wrapping him tightly before kneeling beside him. His chest rose and fell shallowly, but at least he was breathing. I pulled off his soaked shoes and realized his socks were practically frozen to his feet. My heart clenched. How long had he been out there? As I worked to warm him, my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the small backpack he'd been clutching. It looked too heavy for someone his size, bulging awkwardly at the seams. Against my better judgment, I unzipped it. What I found inside made my stomach drop. Bundles of cash. Neatly packed, crisp bills filled the bag, mixed with a few children's clothes and a crumpled piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it, revealing a hastily written note. "Take care of him. He's not safe with us anymore." Who wasn't he safe with? And why was someone sending him away with a fortune stuffed into a school bag? My mind raced with questions, each more troubling than the last. What kind of danger was this boy running from? "Hey," I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Kid, can you hear me? Who are you?" His eyes fluttered open briefly, his voice barely audible. Danny," he stammered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Danny. At least I had a name now, but it didn't answer any of my questions. If anything, it added to the mystery. Who was Danny, and why had someone left him to fend for himself in a blizzard? By morning, the storm had calmed, but the questions swirling in my head hadn't. Danny had stirred a little through the night, mumbling incoherent words in his sleep, but he still hadn't woken fully. I spent the early hours pacing the living room, glancing at the clock, and debating my next move. The bag of money sat on the kitchen table like an unspoken accusation. I couldn't call the cops. Not yet. What if whoever wrote that note was right, and Danny really wasn't safe? What if calling the authorities only put him in more danger? While I was lost in thought, Danny finally stirred. His eyes blinked open, squinting against the morning light. "Where am I?" he croaked. "You're safe," I said, sitting beside him. "I found you out in the storm. My name's Jenna. Can you tell me what happened?" He hesitated, his small hands clutching the blanket tightly. I don't know," he whispered. "I was at home, and then Then my mom said I had to go. She gave me the bag and told me to run. She said they were coming. Who's they? I pressed gently. He shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. I don't know. Bad people. She said they'd hurt me if they found me. My heart sank. This wasn't just a lost boy. It was something much bigger, something far more dangerous than I'd bargained for. Later that day, just as I was trying to piece together what to do next, a loud knock echoed through the house. My blood ran cold. I wasn't expecting anyone, and something about the forcefulness of the knock made my stomach twist. Stay here, I whispered to Danny, who shrank back on the couch. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door, just in case, and cracked it open an inch. Two men in dark suits stood on my porch, their expressions cold and uninviting. Good morning, one of them said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. We're looking for a boy. About this tall, dark hair. Have you seen him? My heart pounded. No, I lied, keeping the door mostly shut. I haven't seen anyone. The man's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in slightly. Are you sure? We have reason to believe he might be in the area. It's very important we find him. I'm sorry, I said firmly, gripping the bat tighter behind the door. I can't help you. They exchanged a glance before stepping back. All right, the other man said, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe me. But if you see anything unusual, you'd better let us know. For your own safety. As they walked away, my knees nearly buckled. Whoever these men were, they weren't just looking for Danny. They were hunting him. And now, by lying to them, I put myself in their crosshairs too. As soon as the men disappeared down the street, I locked the door and shoved the couch against it for good measure. My hands were trembling as I turned back to Danny, who sat huddled on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest. Who are they, Danny? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Why are they after you? His wide, frightened eyes met mine. I don't know their names, he whispered. But they work for someone bad, someone my mom was afraid of. She said he'd hurt us if they caught me. Why you? I pressed. Why not her? Tears streamed down his face. Because of my dad, he said, his voice cracking. She said they don't care about her. They want me because of him. My mind reeled. His father? What could a kid's father possibly have done to put him in this kind of danger? And why was his mother nowhere to be found? The questions kept piling up, but I didn't have time to dwell on them. If those men came back, and I was sure they would, I needed a plan. I knelt in front of Danny and gripped his shoulders gently. Listen to me, I said firmly. You're safe here for now, but we can't stay. They'll come back, and I don't want to be here when they do. Do you understand? He nodded, his little face pale and determined. Where will we go? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm going to keep you safe. I promise. The next few hours were a blur of frantic preparation. I packed what little food I had into a bag, along with extra clothes and the cash from Danny's backpack. My car wasn't exactly reliable, but it was our best shot at getting away before those men returned. Stay close to me, I told Danny as we slipped out the back door and into the icy morning. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the snow blanketing everything in a suffocating silence. My heart pounded as I scanned the street, half expecting those men to jump out at any moment. We made it to the car without incident, but as soon as I turned the key, the engine let out a sickly sputter. Come on, I muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. Not now. Danny's small voice broke through the tense silence. What if they find us? They won't, I said, more to convince myself than him. We're going to be okay. After a few nerve-wracking tries, the engine finally roared to life, and I pulled out onto the road, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the overwhelming need to put as much distance between us and those men as possible. As we drove, Danny began to open up, little by little. My dad, he started, his voice hesitant. He's rich. Like, really rich. I glanced at him, surprised. What kind of rich? I don't know, he admitted. Mom never told me much. She said he was a businessman or something, but she didn't want him in our lives. She said it was safer that way. Safer. The word stuck with me, heavy and ominous. Did he know about you? I asked. Danny nodded. I think so. But Mom said he didn't want to be part of our lives. She always said we were better off without him. I bit my lip, torn between anger and pity. What kind of father abandons his child, especially knowing they could be in danger? But I didn't say that out loud. Danny had enough to deal with without me piling on. We'd been on the road for hours, the snowy countryside stretching endlessly around us, when I noticed the black SUV in the rearview mirror. It wasn't close yet, but something about it set my nerves on edge. It had been following us for too long, matching our turns and speed. "Danny," I said quietly, trying not to alarm him. "I need you to stay calm, okay? But I think we're being followed." His eyes widened, and he turned to look out the back window. "What do we do?" I tightened my grip on the wheel. "We lose them." Without waiting for him to respond, I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the old car groaning in protest as it picked up speed. The SUV responded immediately, closing the distance between us. My heart pounded as I veered onto a narrow side road, the tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement. The SUV followed, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk like twin beacons of doom. "Hold on," I shouted as I swerved onto an even narrower path, barely wide enough for my car. The trees loomed close on either side, their branches scraping against the windows like ghostly fingers. Danny clung to the seat, his face pale with fear. "Are they still behind us?" I glanced in the mirror. The SUV was gone. But for how long? After what felt like hours of driving, I finally pulled over in a secluded spot deep in the woods. The car's engine ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound in the oppressive silence. "We'll stay here for the night," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They won't find us out here." Danny didn't argue. He was exhausted, his small frame slumping in the seat. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're going to get through this," I promised. "I won't let anything happen to you." He nodded, his eyes heavy with sleep, and for the first time since I'd found him in the snowstorm, I felt a flicker of hope. But deep down, I knew the real danger was only just beginning. The night in the woods was bitterly cold, but the car provided a small haven. I wrapped Danny in every spare blanket I had, keeping the heat running intermittently to conserve gas. He fell into a restless sleep, his small body curled up on the passenger seat, while I kept a vigilant eye on the road. Every snap of a twig or rustle of branches sent my heart racing, but the forest remained eerily quiet. As the hours dragged on, I found myself staring at Danny's face, peaceful in sleep despite everything he'd been through. A surge of protectiveness welled up inside me. This kid had been thrown into a nightmare, and now so had I, but I wouldn't let him down. Whoever those men were, whatever they wanted, they wouldn't get him. Not while I was still breathing. The morning came too soon. The pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, and Danny stirred awake, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "Are we safe?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For now," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. "We need to keep moving." We shared a meager breakfast from the supplies I'd packed, but my mind was already racing ahead. We couldn't stay on the run forever. Sooner or later, those men would catch up. The only way to protect Danny was to figure out who they were and why they wanted him. "Danny," I said cautiously, "do you know anything else about your dad? Where he might be?" He hesitated, chewing on his lip. "I think he lives in the city," he said finally. "Mom mentioned it once, but she didn't want me to know too much." The city. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. If his father was as rich and powerful as Danny suggested, maybe he had the resources to keep him safe. But that thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. The man who had abandoned his son didn't deserve to be his savior. Still, I didn't have any better options. The drive to the city was tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting the black SUV to reappear. Danny sat quietly beside me, his small hands gripping the backpack like a lifeline. "Why did your mom leave me that note?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Why didn't she come with you?" Tears glistened in his eyes, but he didn't look at me. "She said she'd find me when it was safe," he whispered. "But I don't know if she can." I didn't press him further. His pain was palpable, and I didn't want to add to it. But inside, my anger was boiling. How could a mother leave her child like this? No matter how dangerous things got, I couldn't imagine walking away from him. We reached the outskirts of the city by midday, the towering skyscrapers looming on the horizon like sentinels. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, paying in cash to avoid leaving a trail. As I settled Danny into the small, dingy room, I felt a pang of guilt. He deserved so much better than this. While he rested, I stepped outside to clear my head. The motel parking lot was nearly empty, but a man in a heavy coat lingered near the entrance, smoking a cigarette. Something about him made my skin crawl. He glanced my way, and I quickly turned back to the room, locking the door behind me. "Everything okay?" Danny asked, sitting up on the bed. "Yeah," I lied. "We're fine." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next day, I began the search for Danny's father. It wasn't easy. He didn't even know the man's full name. But with the cash from his backpack, I was able to pay a private investigator to help. The investigator, a grizzled man named Marcus, raised an eyebrow when I told him the story. "You're telling me this kid's dad is a millionaire, and you don't even know his name?" he asked, skeptical. "Just find him," I snapped, handing over a wad of cash. "I don't care how." Marcus agreed reluctantly, and I returned to the motel, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Danny deserved answers, and I was determined to get them. That night, as I lay awake, I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside the room. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside the bed and motioned for Danny to stay quiet. Slowly, I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. The man from the parking lot was standing outside, his eyes fixed on our door. Panic surged through me. Whoever he wasn't here by coincidence. I had no doubt he was connected to the men from before. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. "Danny," I whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Now." I grabbed Danny's hand and whispered, "Don't make a sound." The bag of cash and our few belongings were already packed, and I slung it over my shoulder as we crept toward the back window. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm for Danny's sake. Outside, the man was pacing in front of the door, his head swiveling as if he was expecting someone else to show up. My stomach churned at the thought of reinforcements. We didn't have much time. "Climb out first," I whispered to Danny, holding the window open. He nodded, his small frame squeezing through easily. I followed as quietly as I could, praying the man wouldn't hear us. The icy air hit me like a slap, but I pushed through it, pulling Danny close as we darted into the shadows of the alley behind the motel. We didn't stop running until we reached a crowded intersection a few blocks away. My lungs burned, and Danny's face was flushed from the cold and exertion. "Are they gone?" he panted. "I don't know," I admitted, scanning the area. The man from the motel was nowhere in sight, but that didn't mean we were safe. "We need to keep moving." By morning, we were holed up in a dingy diner on the other side of the city. Danny picked at a plate of pancakes while I stared out the window, my mind racing. We couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, we'd get caught, and I didn't even know who to turn to for help. Then my phone buzzed. It was Marcus, the private investigator. "I've got a lead," he said, "but you're not going to like it." "What is it?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Your kid's dad. His name is Caleb Morgan. He's one of the wealthiest men in the city, but he's also got a lot of enemies. If what you're telling me is true, it sounds like one of those enemies is after his son, Caleb Morgan." The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd heard it before. "Can you get me to him?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "It won't be easy. Morgan's got layers of security, and I don't think he's going to welcome you with open arms. But I'll see what I can do." I hung up, my stomach twisting. Caleb Morgan might be Danny's best chance at safety, but if he'd abandoned his son once, what was to stop him from doing it again? Later that afternoon, as we waited for Marcus to call back, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from the diner. My pulse quickened. It looked eerily similar to the one that had chased us before. "Danny," I said softly, "we need to go. Now." "But I'm not finished," he protested, pointing to his half-eaten pancakes. "We'll grab something on the way," I insisted, already pulling out cash to pay the bill. The waitress gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I grabbed Danny's hand and led him out the back door, keeping to the shadows as we made our way through the alleys. The SUV didn't follow us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every step felt heavier, every sound sharper. The city had gone from a place of refuge to a cage, and we were running out of places to hide. The call came late that night. Marcus had managed to arrange a meeting with Caleb Morgan. "You're not going to like it," he warned. He's not exactly the warm and fuzzy type. Just tell me where to go, I said. An hour later, Danny and I were standing outside a massive skyscraper in the heart of the city. The building was sleek and imposing, its glass exterior reflecting the lights of the bustling streets below. My palms were sweaty as I approached the security desk, where a guard directed us to a private elevator. Danny clung to my side as the elevator climbed to the top floor. When the doors opened, a man in a tailored suit was waiting for us. He was tall and imposing, with sharp features and cold eyes that immediately put me on edge. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone clipped. "I'm Caleb Morgan. I understand you brought me my son." The tension in the room was palpable as Caleb Morgan led us into his lavish office. The space was decorated in sleek black and silver, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. But the opulence only made me feel more out of place. Caleb's gaze flicked to Danny, who was half hiding behind me. "So, you're the boy," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Danny didn't respond, his grip on my hand tightening. I stepped forward, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "He's your son," I said pointedly. "And he's been through hell because of you." Caleb raised an eyebrow, unbothered by my tone. "And what, exactly, do you expect me to do about it?" "You're his father," I snapped. "He needs protection. There are people after him. Dangerous people." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And you think bringing him here will solve that? If anything, you've just painted a target on my back." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you seriously saying you don't care? This is your son." For a moment, something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "I'll see what I can do," he said finally. "But you should know, helping him won't come without a cost." Caleb's words hit me like a slap. I stood there, trying to make sense of the coldness in his voice. Danny's face fell, his eyes darting between me and the man who was supposed to protect him. "What cost?" I demanded. "He's your son. How can you even think about this like it's a business deal?" Caleb exhaled sharply, standing and walking to the massive windows overlooking the city. "You don't understand what you've stepped into," he said, his tone laced with bitterness. "This isn't about love or responsibility. It's about power. Danny isn't just a boy to them. He's leverage." "Leverage?" I repeated, the word making my stomach turn. Caleb nodded. "His existence is tied to one of my biggest mistakes. A deal I made years ago with men I should never have trusted. They've been waiting for a weakness to exploit, and now you've handed them one." I stepped forward, my anger boiling over. "He's not a weakness. He's your child. And he's scared out of his mind because people are trying to hurt him. Are you really going to stand there and do nothing?" Caleb turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "You think I don't care? That I don't regret what happened? I didn't even know he existed until today. But now that I do, I have to think about the consequences. If I protect him, I'm declaring war on people who won't hesitate to kill anyone who stands in their way, including you." Danny stayed silent through the exchange, his small frame trembling as he clutched his backpack. My heart ached for him, but I couldn't let Caleb intimidate me. "We don't have time for your excuses," I said firmly. "Either you help us, or we'll figure it out on our own." Caleb stared at me, his jaw tightening. "You're brave," he said finally. "I'll give you that. But bravery won't keep him safe." "Then what will?" I challenged. For a moment, Caleb didn't respond. Then he pressed a button on his desk, summoning a man in a crisp black suit. "This is Victor," he said. "He's head of my security team. He'll take you both to a secure location while I handle things on my end." "Handle things how?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Caleb's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something dangerous. "You don't want to know?" Victor drove us to an isolated mansion on the outskirts of the city. The sprawling property was surrounded by high walls and state-of-the-art security, but it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. "This will keep you off their radar for now," Victor said as he led us inside. "No one knows about this place except Mr. Morgan's most trusted people." Danny looked around nervously, his small hand gripping mine tightly. "Is my dad coming here too?" he asked. Victor hesitated. "He has other matters to attend to." The answer did little to reassure either of us, but I didn't press further. For now, the priority was keeping Danny safe. Once we were inside, Victor left us alone, promising to return with updates. The next few days were tense. Danny and I stayed confined to the mansion, always on edge, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I did my best to keep him distracted, playing games and telling stories, but the weight of our situation loomed over us like a storm cloud. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, Danny finally opened up. "Do you think my mom is okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, not wanting to give him false hope. "I think she did what she thought was best to keep you safe," I said carefully. "And I think she'd want you to be brave right now." Danny nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I miss her." "I know," I said, pulling him into a hug. "We'll get through this, Danny. I promise." Our fragile sense of safety shattered a few nights later. I woke to the sound of alarms blaring through the mansion, red lights flashing along the walls. Danny shot up in bed, his eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" he cried. "I don't know," I said, grabbing his hand. "But we need to move." Victor burst into the room moments later, a gun in his hand. "They've found us," he said grimly. "We have to go." My blood ran cold. "How?" "Doesn't matter," Victor said. "We're out of time." He led us through a series of hidden corridors, the sound of gunfire echoing in the distance. My heart pounded as we emerged into a garage filled with sleek black cars. Victor shoved us into one and jumped into the driver's seat. "Hang on," he warned before flooring the gas pedal. The car roared to life, speeding out of the garage and into the night. As we raced through the darkness, the weight of our situation finally hit me. There was no escaping this. No matter where we went, no matter how far we ran, they would always find us. I glanced at Danny, his face pale and frightened, and felt a surge of guilt. I'd promised to keep him safe, but I was failing at every turn. "Where are we going?" I asked Victor, my voice trembling. "To meet Mr. Morgan," he said. "He's decided it's time to end this." We arrived at a sprawling industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Caleb was waiting for us, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards. His expression was colder than ever, but there was an intensity in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "This ends tonight," he said as we approached. "They want to fight? I'll give them one." "What are you talking about?" I asked, horrified. "You're putting Danny in danger." "No," Caleb said firmly. "I'm making sure they never come after him again." The showdown that followed was nothing short of chaos. Caleb's men clashed with the enemy in a brutal firefight, the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoing through the complex. I kept Danny close, shielding him from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the fear. At one point, Caleb appeared beside us, his face grim. "When this is over," he said, "I'll make sure Danny has the life he deserves." "You should have done that from the start," I shot back. He didn't respond, disappearing back into the fray. By the time the dust settled, the complex was eerily silent. Caleb emerged from the chaos, bloodied but victorious. The enemy had been neutralized, but the cost had been high. Several of his men lay injured or worse, and the toll of the battle was written all over his face. Danny ran to him, tears streaming down his face. "Dad!" For the first time, Caleb softened. He knelt and pulled Danny into his arms, holding him tightly. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm so sorry." In the aftermath, Caleb made good on his promise. He arranged for Danny and me to move far away, to a quiet town where we could finally start over. He visited often, slowly building the relationship he should have had from the start. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, one forged in pain, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond between a boy, his mother, and the stranger who became his protector. And as I watched Danny laugh and play, free from fear for the first time, I knew it had all been worth it.